to record to the cloud. Okay, so I like to begin with the land acknowledgement. And I think, as I said, many of you probably joining outside of Guelph. So I encourage you to reflect on your ancestral lands. The land I live in is situated in the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Métis people. Today, this place is home to many First Nations, and acknowledging them reminds us of our important connection to each other and our shared responsibility to this land where we live, learn, and work. In the last year, as part of our Social Science and Humanity Research Council of Canada's Connection Grant, Global Networks Forum on Communication for Agriculture, Rural Development and Environment, we have organized a series of presentations and discussion with established and emerging scholar of communication for social change and development. Out of this initiative, we have also secured a contract for publishing a book. I will share the link for call for proposal of this book. Some of you might find it interesting to contribute. So we want to continue that webinar series in collaboration with the Rural Communication Group of the International Association of Media and Communication Research. Today's session, we have an invited presenter who will present for about 25 minutes, and then we'll begin our interactive discussion session. So we are excited to invite a speaker who is very well known in our Canadian rural research community of practice. Let me introduce Fred Campbell. Fred Campbell is a communicator, educator, and rural development facilitator who has worked out of Atlantic Canada since 1979. With experience as a newspaper reporter, photographer, and editor, he became coordinator of the College of the North Atlantic's journalism program in 1984. From 1989 to 1991, he worked in Newfoundland and Labrador communities as communication program developer for Memorial University's Rural Extension Service. There he provided support to volunteer community television group, which were perceived by extension to be an important tool in community development. For the last 3 decades, he has been continuing his work on development support communication project in various roles, including grassroots initiative, provincial, regional, and international project. In 1992, he founded Ryakuga, a development support grassroots communication organization. Campbell has produced a wide variety of videos, and he has considerable international experience. For example, he has worked on participatory communication project in Southeast Asia, Central America, and the Caribbean. In 2011, Fred was seconded by the Provincial Rural Secretariat to work as a regional planner. But in the fall of 2011, he began to focus exclusively on Ryakuga's grassroots project. In December 2020, Campbell registered another nonprofit, Canadian nonprofit organization called Ethical Journalism. Today, we are excited to learn from Fred about building the 7th wave, participatory development support communication for community sustainability in rural Newfoundland and Labrador. And this presentation is informed by his work in rural Newfoundland for 3 decades of development support communication project. Welcome, Fred. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try to share the screen here. Give me advice if I go wrong. Will we practice this?
Yeah, if you go to share screen.
Okay. Where's my video?
Yeah, we can
And-
see your screen. And
Should I maximize the size of the video?
Yes, yes, please, yeah. If
Okay.
you make the video size, yeah, thank you.
Yes, has she returned the key? People usually go and you will leave the door, everything on.
Okay, we ready?
So
yeah,
Let's
make
give it a
sure
shot.
the key is returned. I have my key of everything. No, for here, I will take care of before I leave.
Okay.
Talking about
Oh,
grassroots,
sorry.
participatory community radio. Typically, we work with community groups on special events which focus on discussion of local issues and cultural celebration. Basic principle of participatory communications, ordinary people have the right to be heard, but also the responsibility to speak out, say something. For each communication project, we look for as many partners as possible. There were almost 30 partners in Sharing Our Future. Always, in looking for partners, we emphasize commonalities rather than differences. In the communities, we work with people of all ages and all walks of life. Our community media project, animators or encouragers, have included women at home, retired teachers, and recent university graduates. The local musicians, who are so important in our community events, are not merely entertainers. They create an environment in which people feel good about their culture, who they are. Local people can speak out and plan their own future when they feel pride in themselves. Mainstream media tend to make people who live away from big centers feel inferior and insecure. We try to stress the positive aspects of local environment and its culture. This is also known as pride of place. Again, we want people to feel good about themselves and speak out. Ben and Friends is one of the most popular programs on VOBB, the Voice of Bombay. A Caribbean Federation of Youth slogan says, "Youth are the present answer to the future." Youth are essential in our media projects. They are not afraid of technology. Their energy catalyzes the process. An intergenerational mix is good. Older people gain respect for the technical powers of youth, while younger people become interested in community issues. We are talking about public space, participatory, interactive radio.
Okay. I should say first, I've been on the road for a month, which means that work is starting up again. And, but I have to admit, I'm a bit fried. I got the time wrong. I added instead of subtracted, and I ended up at my brother's place because I had to drive a half hour to get to somewhere with internet. Anyway, here we go. I realized that I don't really have a good grasp on who I'm talking to. I suspect that people are from all over. So I'm thinking that I should actually start and give a very brief description of Newfoundland, because we're talking about the island of Newfoundland. Newfoundland has only been a Canadian province for 52 years. You know, Canadian Confederation goes back to what, 1867. I think most
Fred,
provinces.
Fred, sorry for interacting. I
Yeah.
think are you sharing any slide or anything? If not,
You can't see anything?
yeah, I can see your screen, like your.
But are you seeing the whole, you're not just seeing the video itself, are you?
No.
Okay, let me
only-
see if I can get there.
Maybe you minimize your screen.
It's what's happened is my the panel for QuickTime Player is covered up by the Zoom panel. And I'm
Yeah, maybe you can try again with sharing again.
okay. Right. Maybe if I could click this one instead. Okay, here we go. Okay. Now I've lost, can you see anything now?
No, you go to Zoom and go to share screen.
Okay. I have to get out of this then.
Yeah, that's good.
But now I can't get to the. Sorry about this. Okay, here we go. How about now? Can you
Yeah,
see anything?
We can see your picture. Yeah.
Okay, so that I will continue. Sorry about this. This is my first time doing this in this way. Oh, why isn't it working?
Yeah, looks good now.
Keeps stopping. Okay, here we go. Okay, so I'm talking about Newfoundland, right? And before 1949, all Newfoundlanders entering Canada had to pass through immigration and customs. In 1949, Newfoundland was a British colony with a standard of living roughly comparable to a Mediterranean country such as Greece or Portugal. The history of the island of Newfoundland is about fishing. Portuguese and Basques fished the Grand Bank 600 years ago. During the colonial era, schooners transported loads of salt fish to Europe and the Caribbean. The French retained the fishing rights of Western Newfoundland until 1904. Traditionally, people settled on the island in small, isolated fishing villages. Boats were the only means of transportation, and many communities were only connected by roads in the 1960s and 70s. The road across Newfoundland is more than 900 kilometers. It's the 10th largest island in the world. The population is about 500,000 now. One could argue that the history of Newfoundland is also a story of exploitation. The rich natural resources of the island continue to be taken away by Europeans, Americans, and Canadians. The forests, slow to regenerate in this northern climate, are being clear-cut for the foreign-owned pulp and paper industry. The province still produces 80% of the iron ore of Canada. Newfoundland is dotted with communities trying to survive the closure of ravaged mines. Quebec is powered by electricity, which they managed to wrangle from Newfoundland at a deal which refunds little to the provincial coffers. And this was written a few years ago. And now there's actually another dam, which is another foreign company is taking the profits. But what often happens when foreign countries come in to take over, they set up, so they always say that the reason that the British Empire actually happened was divide and conquer. And so what I'm also doing with this is I'm identifying that I have a definite point of view. I feel very strongly about exploitation by large corporations and the loss of local control. And I don't apologize for this. The ethics story, there's a website, which is ryakuga.ca, where I spent all week actually putting this presentation on. So that's ryakuga.ca. My ethics story. I've been very indignant, I guess, and I remember the Spanish indignados, and I feel really indignant about what's happening in the world with exploitation, and what's happening locally with exploitation. In 2018, the Mi'kmaq, who are the Aboriginal people of Eastern Canada, the Mi'kmaq were taking the province to court. The province had a deal where it was going to enter caverns below a Mi'kmaq community and store natural gas in these communities. So what the Mi'kmaq are doing, like all over the place with fishing this year, is they are taking the province to court. A government lawyer actually showed up in court in 2018 and said the province did not have to deal with a conquered Aboriginal people. And of course, eventually, I think the Mi'kmaq won the case. But this, to me, in 2018, we have political leaders, and they retracted their statement and that sort of thing. So at that time, this is a personal story, in 2018, I got in my rowboat, my canoe, and I rowed out into the river thinking. And I thought to myself, as somebody who has been a journalism practitioner, all my life and taught, that we need ethical. We need ethical. In my mind, when you read books on ethics and journalism, it's always about telling both sides of the story. And of course, with Edward Bernays, it's been taken over. The public relations industry and Bannons and the Trumps have basically taken over journalism. So when they tell their side of the story, or a major corporation with all its PR people, there's really no room for local people to tell their story. So I think ethics to me means more on local rights and people being treated decently and not exploited. So anyway, I couldn't believe that I could actually register a URL of ethical journalism. It thought to me somebody had done it. And then I went again last year and I registered as a nonprofit. No problem. There is no such thing. There was no entity called ethical journalism in Canada, which I find to be interesting. So anyway, I have a definite point of view. My point of view is against greed and obscene corporate profits. My point of view is for local control and actually the right of all of us all over the world control our own lives with the caveat that we don't harm others. So here's problem number one. And problem number one is the corporate media. In Newfoundland, as the website says, there were all kinds. When I first started teaching journalism, there were all kinds of local radio stations. They've all disappeared and been taken over. In New Jersey, there was a story where the New Jersey government and the university there started a program spending a lot of money and to protect local journalism. And it wasn't just to protect business, but they determined, and I don't have the actual quote here, that people without local media are unable to make decisions and participate in local governance. And I really believe that. And I believe in the importance of local governance. I'm sort of skipping through this. The problem number two I see, and at the web page that I have the previous 6 waves highlighted at the top of the page, and you can go there. It would take forever to run through them. But what it shows is that the champions of local media have been wiped out one by one each time. Like Mun Extension was there. Mun Extension befriended the local fishermen at the closure of the fishery, and basically the government shut them down. The government has shut down its development associations, its zone boards. Each time that local power seems to submerge, they get shut down. Roger Epp is, I think he was president of Camrose, University of Alberta, a while ago. I'm not sure exactly what he's doing now. He participated in the writing of a book, and the book is called Writing Off the Rural West, and on globalization, governments, and the transformation of rural communities. Have I done 20 minutes yet? And so anyway, and his thing is political de-skilling. So that's what I'm calling, I'm also calling it political de-skilling. And there was a, which I haven't actually mentioned here, there was the Economic Recovery Commission that was set up in Newfoundland and wiped out actually by government. And they have in Doug House's book, which was called Against the Tide, and he talks about how it was actually local politicians in St. John's, provincial politicians, who wiped out the Economic Recovery Commission. Richard Fuchs, who died last week, was part of that and became a leader of rural telecenters around the world. Anyway, Doug House has written the book Against the Tide, and he talks about citizen participation and decentralized decision-making. And I'd just like to read this. Historic weakness of Newfoundland and Labrador society has been its underdeveloped municipal level of government and overdependence on state officials, whether from Great Britain, mainland Canada, or the city of St. John's. the Royal Commission argued strongly for greater decentralization of political and economic decision-making from both the federal and provincial governments to community and regional organizations, and greater decentralization with government agencies and departments themselves. So, and this would be central to reducing depending on government and achieving greater self-reliance. I was at Ryakuga's event, started again with a bang. It was the first major conference in Newfoundland since the pandemic started. The meeting hall, and the pictures are on that, the meeting hall was actually in a hockey rink. It was incredible, but the premier came to it along with his ministers and had a huge session. And the huge session was on what he called regionalization, and we weren't allowed to broadcast it. Nobody was allowed in it. It was a closed forum. And what my advisors in the communities are saying is that regionalization means amalgamation. Actually, regionalization is kind of an interesting term. It sounds kind of diverse in that. Amalgamation is a more definite term, and which means resettlement. And of course, Newfoundland lost about, as you saw in that video, about 300 communities in the 1960s that were closed down as government tried to set up growth centers, which totally failed. Another suggested solution, as you saw that video, is that we continue with grassroots participatory development support communications. I've ended up at the university. I was invited at the university to take a transdisciplinary program. And one of the first questions I asked was, is it possible, and that's what actually building this, the seventh wave of communication, that's my project, our project, I should say. And so I chose Stranger in a Strange Land because that's how I feel at the university. When I first went there, I asked, can a practitioner actually enter the university? And I bet a lot of you have opinions on that and maybe advice. There's a lot of problems for me in becoming a practitioner in the university. A friend of mine who is a Mi'kmaq who actually works at the university, and he calls Grenfell in Corner Brook, sits way up on top of the hill, and he calls it the fortress. And he was actually the person who told me that when he went out from his small Mi'kmaq community to go to high school, he felt like a stranger in a strange land, which was basically a Robert Heinlein sci-fi novel, I think from the 70s or whatever. So here are some of my questions, like for the university. They talk about it has to be my project. I have to define my project, and this is all about my project. But that's entirely opposed to how I work as a community development person. Like the first thing we establish is our project. And Bev Kirby, who was a major leader of the community education, she was community educator of the year and that sort of thing. And she always said that participatory means you give it away. So to actually participate with communities, we have to share, we have to give it away. I came up with this little diagram, which is also on the webpage, because as part of my project, I'm talking about developing a field worker's guide. And this is a field worker's guide to community intervention, because when we go out, if we don't live in the community, no matter how well guided we are intervening. So I set up a spectrum, and like I say, this is on that webpage. So my spectrum goes, what the university talks a lot about is engagement all the time, and engagement is the beautiful word. And engagement is actually, in my mind, if I stick my head out the window of my car and I ask directions to somebody walking down the street and they give me directions up the hill, that's engagement. Engagement can be very, very minimal. And what I've often seen with engagement is university people go out into the community and make a presentation, and then at the end they ask if you have any questions. So my spectrum goes engagement, next is a network, and next is a collaboration, and next is a partnership. So what I'm actually looking for are partners. So a network, a collaboration, I think, and what is a coalition? A collaboration, I think, is maybe where two groups or desperate groups, but they join together for one project. To me, partnering means a continuous relationship and doesn't actually depend on funding. Partners in life are suggest some kind of intimacy. So partners are what I would strive for. And engagement, I don't really see how engagement, it's good to know another one exists, but I think we have to go further. I think we have to look more for partners, people who share philosophies and people who will continuously work together. The other thing that I came up against, I was quite surprised as I became more acquainted with the university and the people who supposedly are out working in the communities. And I have actually seen these people take over processes that, because I've been around for decades, I know they were going on long before and a lot of work was done. And they ignore it and they come up with these projects, their projects, which basically ignore everybody who came before. And I think it's like to achieve a name or whatever, excuse me, or money. So I welcome standing on the shoulders of giants, and I think Kant used it, but it goes back to John of Salisbury in the Middle Ages, where he said, you know, they would look back at the Greeks and everything that Aristotle and Plato had done, and to actually be standing on the shoulders of giants. So one giant whose shoulders I'm standing on, I could come up with millions of them. Actually, they're not millions, but a lot. Moses Cody was I guess you would say a activist scholar priest at Antigonish, University of Antigonish in the 30s. And he became well known at the time. He started credit unions and cooperatives along working collectively. And his book is called, his famous book is called Masters of Their Own Destiny. And he at the time in the 30s said, we have left the age of the individual and we're moving into the age of the collective. And he was accused of being a communist in a lot of forums, but he was no communist. He was an intelligent person who cared for his communities. And but at the time he went to the States and he actually made public speeches at Congress against McCarthyism. He wasn't afraid to speak out. And so my other giant is Calvin White. And Calvin White was president of the Federation of Indians in Newfoundland in the 70s. He's been chief of Flat Bay. He's like this amazing person. He's been given an honorary doctorate, so he can actually be one of my supervisors. And he's a mentor. And we actually did a community project there a couple of weeks ago in his community. And he was bringing in people from all over, sharing. And one of the things I found from everything that was said there, nobody talked about the individual. They talked about the collective, which I think is Aboriginal wisdom. And so I was interested. I've even taken courses. This has all happened by accident, actually. And I've been taking courses, Indigenous courses, because Memorial University is pushing indigenization. Anyway, so I discovered that things really changed a lot for Aboriginal people across Canada. And it happened in 1969 after Trudeau introduced a white paper, which was bad news. And so I went to Calvin and I said, tell me more about the Aboriginal fight back in '69. And Calvin looks at me and he says, well, he said, actually, it was an awakening. And I call it, it was when we woke up. And it was like really interesting. Every time I meet this man, I learn something from him. And I have, so how am I doing for time? Okay. I hope people can hear me.
You're good. Maybe another 5 minutes.
Okay, I'll just run down through this. I could talk forever about this, you know, and because I'm so tired and I had a big espresso this morning to get myself on the go. So I have, what I talk about is 12,000 years of Indigenous wisdom informing my work in this project of building the seventh wave. And I'm actually in Nova Scotia now at the farm on the river, which now only has a hotspot. So that's why I had to drive a half hour to my brother's kitchen to do this. One of the most beautiful stories in the world is how the French came to here and were actually saved from dying of starvation. The indigenous people brought them spruce tea and that sort of thing, and they intermarried and became the Acadians, and it's like a beautiful story, but it was different with the English, and especially the American militia. And the American militia came in with their scalping, and they're cutting heads off of entire communities and putting them up on scabbards. I'm sorry, this is messy, but it was true, and it was a genocide. And they were offering $100 for the scalp of a man, but for a woman or a child, it was only $50. And there's stories, Norman O'Brien tells stories of how they would dance around the street, and this is by Boston government. They would dance around the street of Boston with the tops of heads of these people that they'd murdered. Of the Mi'kmaq themselves, who had been here for 12,000 years, living here all over Eastern Canada, from Quebec right down, 90% died in the first 100 years after meeting the Americans, Europeans, sorry, mostly in the 17th century, mostly from disease at first. So it's like amazing, but they're coming back, and they're coming back very strong. And it began with Calvin's awakening in 1969. In 2019, I was invited by Marilyn Emery to go to Australia to take part in an open systems theory course. It was called Participative Design for Participative Democracy and the Search Conferencing. And that's where I actually picked up, because Marilyn talks very strongly that open systems theory is informed by 40,000 years of Aboriginal history. And there's a guy called Philip Deering, I believe. He's a Mohawk scholar, and who did a PhD with Don Daguerre at Concordia. And he writes very strongly, he's met Marilyn, and he writes very strongly of open systems theory and Aboriginal wisdom. The learnings I'm bringing back, though, for this purpose, one is active adaptation, how we have to continually be active adapting. And what Marilyn says now, it's not just active adapting, which we've learned through the pandemic, it's actually actively adapting to active adaptation, and there's a difference. And the other thing is for planning. So we're building the seventh wave. So how do we do it? We do it with lots of partners, and we follow the OST concept of solving the jigsaw puzzle. It's a jigsaw puzzle when you have a large social, political problem, communication problem over a large area, like the 10th largest island in the world. And but everybody has a piece. So when I go to the communities and I talk to the communities, I don't go to the communities as any kind of expert. I have my piece, they'll have theirs. Sorry. The Antigonish movement, I knew about the Antigonish movement. They did an interesting thing. They had University of the Air, and they would have people, they actually brought people in. They had people's schools where they were teaching in the school, but then they decided they couldn't just be bringing everybody to the university. They had to go to the people. So they set up University of the Air, broadcasting. I'd love to do this, but broadcasting to kitchen meetings. So they'd have people sitting around in kitchen meetings, and they would discuss the broadcast. And we can do so much now with the internet. I think a possible solution too is to challenge this co-opted language. I find everybody using participatory, and it's not participatory at all, right? And that was actually one thing that somebody said. People call it participatory when all they ask for is feedback at the end of the presentation, right? And the other thing I found, I keep getting all these loops in my life, and after the end of extension, I started working internationally, but in Thailand and stuff, and I would stop over at my my mother was from England. I would stop visit my relatives in south of England. And so I read something there about, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, SACE Hamelink, and the IAMCR or whatever. And I actually asked to go meet him. And I was talking to his wife and I was going to go to Amsterdam, but I ended up getting married instead. And but the marriage is over, but anyway, but here I am back reading Cease Hamalik. I've got one of his books, which is, it's on empowerment and disempowerment trends in world communication. And it's full of people, and it talks about the People's Charter. So what do we have now? We have a People's Party in Canada that's sort of right-wing fascist, and we have Trump and sort of thing. I think I have one paragraph. So possible solution number 3 is partners. The Mi'kmaq have already agreed to be partner number 1 in this. And the Mi'kmaq are really interesting because one of the things they say, when the Europeans came to Newfoundland, they actually adopted the Mi'kmaq way of life. And so the rural outports are actually, and this one rural outport just distributed $2 million worth of food out through Newfoundland. I think it's a federal program, but they did it with volunteers. And they didn't just keep it for themselves, they distributed it. Municipality of Newfoundland and Labrador has I've been talking to them about becoming a partner. They have 250 municipalities. So I'm sort of hoping that perhaps we can have MNL as a new champion for development sport communications in Newfoundland. It's not all bad. And I want to say this, I've gone on the website, I have the word Iowa, but it's not Iowa, it's actually Iva. And there's I love reading creation myths from other cultures. And this is from India, a book called Roberto Colasso. And he talks about how the storytellers, the Sanskrit storytellers back in the early days would say Iva, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this right, which is perhaps, or so to speak. And it kind of protects yourself. So I'm basically, my entire presentation is Iva. It's my own point of view. And thank you very much. I stop sharing screen now, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred Campbell. Very interesting presentation, especially the pictures tells a lot of stories that you have been narrating. I'd like to mention that Fred is also, he agreed to contribute to our book. And there will be a chapter out of this presentation. I'm sure that it will be really valuable to, learn from that chapter. Very interesting presentation, Fred. Please join us, with a round of applause, for this excellent presentation. Okay, so now I'd like to invite one established scholar in our field and one emerging and an early scholar, PhD student, for discussion with Fred Campbell. Let me now invite Dr. Sarah Cardy to join us as a discussant. Sarah is the Director of Graduate Institute for International Development, Agriculture and Economics, University of Reading. She's also a Program Director for MSc Applied International Development and Communication for Development. I'd like to also mention that she's the co-chair of the Rural Communication Group of IAMCR. Fred, can you open your camera? Yeah. So here we are. Fred, we can see you.
I have to go and stand up over there. Just a sec. Let me.
And also in the discussion,
okay.
I'd like to invite Firoz Alam. He's a doctoral student at the School of Environmental Design and Rural Development. And I'm sure, Firoz, your work is really somehow related to this talk because you talk a lot about capitalism, digitalization, and I'm also curious to hear the discussion. So let me start with, from Dr. Cardy, some thought about the presentation and also, any comments, any questions. While we continue the conversation with Fred, we would also like to take questions from our audience. Please feel free to use chat function to ask a question or raise your hand if you wish to ask a question on camera. Go ahead, Dr. Cardi.
Thank you, Adaharo. Thank you, Fred. That was a really rich conversation, and I think it had me going in about 20 different directions too. Yeah, but in the most wonderful, delightful way, because what you've got to say brings together so many things that I don't think always come into conversation with each other. And I also love the drawing of the spectrum of what engagement to participation and partnership, because I certainly, everything you said really resonated with me on a whole range of levels. I can certainly understand that we often talk, it reminded me a bit of Jules Pretty's typology of participation, from consultation and just showing up and counting people in a room to people owning the process and outsiders being there to listen and keep their mouths shut in many ways.
It's kind of interesting. Sorry, it's kind of interesting because like for more years than I will admit, I've been a practitioner and it's my inclination, right? But now, and I only really accepted the offer of coming into this new program because in the pandemic and with the financial closure of Newfoundland, I didn't have any work. So I wanted to get back in the communities, right? But now that I'm back, now that I'm in the university, like I said, the problem, but I find it really interesting because it makes me think about what I do and have to explain what I do, where before you just work with the people, right? And this thing just popped into my head. And so I'm quite ready for anybody to criticize it and tear it apart, but it really I really feel this way right now, right?
Well, I mean, part of what struck me is that because this does come from your experience and your instinct to let's talk to people within communities. And I was just talking this morning about how in an online training that I was participating in, I realized, I mean, the biggest thing that I've learned how to do when you really do want to hear the voices of people who are often either voiceless or whose voices have been shoved to the side, is you keep your mouth shut.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And you grow some ears and you really genuinely listen. And actually, I think one of the things that struck me about your diagram is that a lot of these typologies are very hierarchical, and yours is a curve. And that might seem slightly pedantic, but I think actually having something that is circular where you understand what feeds into what, and understanding that relationships aren't top down, and that as long as we recognize what it is that we're doing, there are relationships between them. So I actually liked your diagram and thought it was a step up from these ladders and these hierarchies.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, that like I'm accidentally working with the Mi'kmaq, but they don't have hierarchies.
Yeah.
And they are also intensely matriarchal.
Yeah.
Most of the what they call chiefs at this community radio event the other day, they were mostly women. And there seems to be, in fact, I was told somewhere I read, I can't find it, that when the English first came to deal with Aboriginal people, they wouldn't accept women into their councils, and the women were leaders. But I mean, like I have all kinds of English relatives, and my mother's from England, that kind of stuff. But man, England is such a hierarchical place. Oh
goodness, yes. Being at an English university and not being from I grew up in Southern Ontario. That was a learning curve that really. I choose to ignore more often than not, maybe to my detriment. But wanted to, there's a couple of things I wanted, because I think you have a particular perspective where we can learn an awful lot. There's a lot of things we can learn from you, but I was reflecting on the parts. I was on the Ryakuga website, and the learning from indigenous knowledges. I've been working on a project in northern Philippines with indigenous communities, and they also, the communities that we visited, had half the chiefs were women, half the chiefs were men, and there was a lot of, it was very much a conversation about, well, it's about the collective, and it's
Absolutely.
about, and the community philosophy was, we all support one another, and if one person in our community doesn't have something, then that's a problem if we all share it. And it made me, because I think one of the things we are challenged, the depoliticization of the idea of participation, because a lot of the teeth have been ripped from it. Because I think you're right, you toss the word participation around without thinking about the really deep meaning of it. And this should be challenging power structures. And so I've been thinking, well, what are the things that, where are the places that I've been learning myself about that can tell us more about how to do that? Certainly learning from the communities we've been engaged with has been a fascinating place. And I think, well, where are the spaces where learning about non-European or non-Western or non-dominant thought systems can really help us partially put the teeth back into participation? So I was wondering, so when you talked about learning from 12,000 years of Mi'kmaq history, I wonder, what are some of the lessons that you would highlight and some of the things that you've learned that we can share with other people who are involved in communication?
Yeah, that's a really big question.
Sorry.
Like where like I'm in Nova Scotia right now, and like I say, I have this kind of farm thing on, and the Mi'kmaq in Nova Scotia, their power place, there's a woman called Ruth Whitehead who came from the States originally, and who's written a number of books. I think she's with maybe the Nova Scotia Museum now or something. And she has written fascinating things on the concept of Mi'kmaq and power. So just to give you an idea, so the power center is called Blomidon, and it's where Glooskap, you know, the giant, lived. And it's also the place at the highest tides in the world. So my concept is, how did they know? How did they know to put their power place at the point of the highest tides in the world? You know, which they couldn't have had any concept. They probably had no concept even of world. Another thing that's developed that's connecting, so there's so many connections you see between my experience in Australia and my experience now with the Mi'kmaq and back here in Atlantic Canada. And one is the Fred Emery of the open systems theory wrote a lot on the importance of the spoken word, that the spoken word is, that actually the written word is the communication of the dominant, and the development of he talks about the development, and a lot of people in Europe picked up on this too, you know, and so we have, and I feel quite strongly about it too, being involved in radio. But so I go to Calvin White, who really does not like to do digital. And Calvin, so I did a whole interview on the power of the spoken word. And what I'm trying to do, and I seem to be getting some kind of support, what I'm trying to do is bring that into this PhD program so that the spoken word is equal in value to the written word. And Calvin is eloquent, like although he's Dr. Calvin now, he finished a grade 8, right? And it's just his wisdom and the wisdom that gets passed on. And so I would say that's another thing that I'm learning is the spoken word, but also working together collectively, the power of the matriarchy, the concern for the environment. They have a program now where they are building greenhouses in these communities are scattered all over the place, right? And but what's the greenhouses for the collective? So they getting starter plants so that the community can then come and go back to growing their own food again instead of going to the department stores, right? So I'd say every single time I go there, I learn.
Hey, very interesting conversation. And folks who are listening to us, don't forget to ask question if you have anyone. So now I like to switch to Firoz. Firoz, you were just started your PhD, and I know that you were working with me, so that's why I know about your work a little bit better. So you're working in digital capitalism, misinformation, and you're talking about digital critical literacy. So how you thought about what Fred presented from Atlantic Canada and rural Canada, right? So
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Chaudhary, and thank you. When Dr. Gardi was saying about a hierarchical knowledge production, I was laughing here too, thinking, oh yeah. And Fred, wonderful presentation, and there are so many things that that was going in my head. One of the things that you brought about in terms of knowledge production, in terms of what we feel going to academic setup, who are practitioners. Like you, I consider myself as a practitioner. I've been teaching for the past 25 years. I'm very connected to the rural community of Bangladesh. So what you do, something that we've been doing for over 2 decades, is that how do you get the rural voice of Bangladesh in the media? Now, I am reading a book I started last week in terms of we are going through a phase in the digital capitalism, is that the colonization of mind using technology. So if you think about that, anything and everything that we do today, it depends on how much attention we can direct towards something. But when in the digital capitalism, the profit is directly connected to how much of your attention can be colonized. So we are seeing a new version of capitalism that replaces the old modality of knowledge production and kind of connection. So to add to Fred, I don't think that we give enough attention that how knowledge production in academic setup is almost inescapably colonial. So in that knowledge production system, how the practitioners will find voice is an uphill battle already. So that's that. A book came out this month, is that The Dawn of Everything. So when Fred was talking about borrowing from 12,000 years of indigenous wisdom, David Graeber, unfortunately passed away, and Oxford scholar Wengrow, they have written a book, is that pretty much everything we know about history, about science could be contested, could be questioned based on how the knowledge has been produced. I wanted us to consider, and I would like this, I'd like to ask this question to Fred as well, is when we go to a space of knowledge production, how do we keep in mind that because our indoctrination from childhood, not necessarily only in university, but in the social spaces when we interact with each other, we are so obsessed with colonizing a space, colonizing time, colonizing attention. How do you go into a community to be in knowledge production practices and also be very mindful that am I becoming occupied, or am I becoming one of the contributor to the colonial power practices going into the community, given that our so-called academic disposition often triggers us to talk and listen less?
There's an article written on knowledge systems. The guy's first name's Sandy, and they know him at Grenfell. They forced me to read it in one of my courses, and I wanted to read something by an Indigenous author, and they said, no, you have to read this. So, and I'm new to this, okay? So I'm just playing with it. And so it's basically on knowledge systems. and it's quite irreverent. Like he talks about how academics going out to communities and talking over people. They don't actually communicate with people. It goes over people's heads and stuff like that. And he has a sort of line in it. Well, why do they do this? And it sort of says, well, I think they just have to get a life, right? And actually communicate with people as human beings. And so, for example, in Newfoundland, one of the things they're talking about is the myth of the extension service. And I was with the extension service at the very end, you know, so there are people like fighting to get it back, but they'll never get it back. I mean, it's like they would send a field worker would only go to a community if the community requested it. When the field worker got to the community, they didn't have to produce anything for an entire year. Was just waiting so that the community knew they were there, what their talents were, and they would ask them to do. That's not going to happen, right? You know, in bankrupt. So I'm thinking more, but I was the librarian at Extension. I photocopied, in the age of the photocopier, I photocopied all these reports. And when they closed down Extension, the politicians and the head of the university, they closed down Extension. Man, they burnt stuff. Stuff went shredded. Stuff went in, it was called Robin Hood Bay in St. John's, and they just dumped stuff. So I think I have in my, you know, musty cardboard boxes in the attic, I have photocopied reports, which I think they're only there, okay? So one of the things I talked to Calvin about is the whole knowledge and how knowledge is transferred, and we're quite used to it, the knowledge keepers, right? And I was asking him, well, how does that happen? How is somebody identified as a knowledge keeper? Where does that come from? And I said, does it run in families or something like that? And he said, well, he said, actually, the elders they can identify somebody at a young age as somebody who would be a potential knowledge keeper to transmit the knowledge like over thousands of years, right? And so I asked him if this would be okay, because I think of myself in terms of participatory communications, my decades of participatory communication, as more of a knowledge keeper, like just helping get the knowledge, and as much as possible with not being interpreted, like have the actual words of these people come through, right? And there's lots of video and stuff, so you can actually get the actual what people said. And I know that when I'm sorry, this is a long-winded, but when I went out into Flat Bay just recently, the people who should know better at the university were saying, well, are they going to talk about this? And I said, really, I carry the boxes. I plug in the wires. It's none of my business. They are in total control. I'm not. I have no control over it. And I only spoke when I'm spoken to, or actually I don't, it's a lie. I'll get up and say, that was amazing. I've just, this is incredible learning, you know, and I usually forget to use the mic. So I think there's just Extension, there's a lot of teaching in those old writings of Extension. And it was like back in the 60s, there was a time of documentary filmmakers never editing. I have no right to edit, and that's what I do. And the approval screenings. So every video that I do with people, I say, you watch it first and you tell me. In fact, if it's a YouTube, I'll put it up in a private space. So I don't release anything. I don't edit anything unless they ask, right? And I don't know.
And I think Professor Chaudhary will also be able to attest to that, how much the knowledge from the global south gets delegitimized in the knowledge production system. How much is that knowledge that is spoken in Bangla, where I'm from? I mean, I often say that we carry double consciousness, is that our one knowledge, the way the epistemology that actually shaped our ontology, that gets totally delegitimized in the knowledge system. And the academic gatekeepers will not only trash you with the benign performative politeness, they will literally crush you when you want to cite things that comes from your experience. I'm sorry, I didn't want to add that.
No, that's true. That's absolutely true. The Mi'kmaq call it two-eyed seeing, by the way. Two-eyed seeing, and they've written on it. And it's really interesting.
Yeah, and that's why I'm privileged to be able to work with Professor Chaudhary, because he coming from same place where I am coming from, we speak the same language, and he'll be able to look into the body of knowledge that I bring in order to knowledge production. I mean, more than 90% knowledge production are coming from global north and in epistemology, which finds it epistemology by subjugating or suppressing the other bodies of knowledge. So I just wanted to bring that out.
Yeah, Firoz, yeah, it has
I think
been
we have to
super-
speak like that. Like when I talking to Kelly, who is and she's a wonderful, in all of Memorial University, she's probably the only community oriented person there, really. And, but I told her when I got into it, I said, I'm not going to keep my mouth shut. Do you know what I mean? Like, basically at my age, I don't have anything to lose anyway. I'm not getting a job anywhere out of this or anything like that, right? It's more, actually, I'm enjoying it. And it's far better than, sitting in a coffee shop for the rest of my life, right? And but I said, I have to speak. And she said, well, good, you can speak for me too, right? And so I think we have, it's almost like there's it's almost like Back to the Future, if you know what I mean. It's like, I remember talking to people like this. It was almost like about 1990, the world went to sleep or something, right? It was just like the people who spoke out and said something, they just kind of disappeared off the map, and everybody was meek and mild. And I think we have to speak out. We just do, right? And I remember you talking about Marxism in that previous, and I thought, well, this is great. This is fantastic, right? And it's like whatever his name, I can't pronounce the Greek name, Yanis Varoufakis or whatever. The guy wrote the article on being a reluctant Marxist and stuff. He's always spoken out, and I think that we have to. There's just no other way. We have to speak out.
Okay, so I think our discussion is now like pick up, there is so much to discuss. We are almost in our scheduled time, but let us take 10-15 minutes more. I hope you can still keep stay tuned with us. So there are a couple of questions from the audience. So Professor Helen Hamley, she was curious to know about the FOGO process, and that actually we teach at the University of Guelph in our Capacity Development Extension program. So her question is about what are your reflections on that famous case of FOGO process now in 2021?
Can I be honest? I've actually discussed this on community radio on Fogo Island. Dave Curran, I don't know, the singer Amelia Curran's father, was the last acting director of Extension. And I was a journalism professor, and a friend of mine who's now dead, he brought me in like a Jesuit into Extension, right? You went in there with like such a philosophy and discovering the FOGO process. So I talked to Dave about it, and Dave looks at me. I mean, he was a long time field worker. He said the FOGO process is just a myth, isn't it? And I sort of thought, I said, well, yeah, but we need our myths. We must have our myths. So I went to, and I'm working in Tilting, like I'm 9 years. We did 9 years of projects on Fogo Island. And so I go to Roy, and Roy is one of the films of the FOGO process, and it was The Wedding. And and he was like right in it. So I said, how did they really do the approval screenings, right? Because I was a bit skeptical, right? Because it was National Film Board, it wasn't Newfoundlanders, right? And he said, he looked at me and he laughed. He said, Fred, we're not like that. So in other words, they didn't get asked. And if they were asked, they would say, oh yeah, go for it. It's beautiful. It's wonderful, right? And the other thing is I have a film. It's of the same process because I worked a bit in rural Kentucky. And this film was made at the same time. A filmmaker from Montreal went down to rural Kentucky doing interviews. So this whole thing, it was on the fight against poverty. And the people felt like they were being smeared, right? Like by this, there are all these people coming in to save them and stuff like that. And so the filmmaker who went down from the film board was shot and killed in the middle of the street. And so the woman who was from Kentucky, she was with Apple Shop down there, and she made this film. And I was there like for its premiere there and stuff like that, and to discuss it, because obviously FOGO came up at the same time, right? And it was a guy who just kind of like an ex-war veteran. He kind of freaked out. He thought that they were making fun of him and his neighbors and stuff like that. And he just went out and killed the guy. So a lot of people have the kind of theory that Fogo Island was kind of like in a terrible state and it was like saved by the Fogo process and that kind of thing. And somebody asked me like, well, how do people feel about that time? And I said, they feel nostalgic. It was this wonderful time of going out in fishing boats, you know, before the big takeover. And, you know, and Fogo now is very famous because of Zita's merchandising of Fogo Island. And, you know, so I don't know, and I've sat on radio, like discussing Fogo process in a island-wide radio event. And I told about Dave's thing. It was a myth, but we need our myths. So I didn't go back in my periods to the Fogo process because I don't really consider that was participatory development support communications. And really, Tony Williamson invented the Fogo process. Tony was working, and other people have agreed with that. Tony was working with FAO, and he was trying to publicize. He was doing great stuff. I worked with him in Thailand. But I don't know. I run around in circles on that. Sorry.
Helen, any quick comments? Or
No, I really appreciated the exchange today, and I think it also makes us sort of think about how we produce these cases in rural communication studies and put them on a pedestal. And don't recognize them when they do become mythologized or romanticized. But I agree with Fred, and he knows this already, that we need those stories sometimes as well. And yeah, and I'm just really privileged to be here today. Thanks.
Yeah, and I still recall, Helen, that I think it's 2012 or 2013 when you're teaching communication for social change course, and you were showing some of the work from Fogo process, and then Don Snowden's work in India, especially. That video was really, really emotional for me. I don't know whether we kept that video materials or not. I still think that these are some inspirational work, especially for today's digital world, you know. And
I actually I could say, I have a film that came from Extension when they were throwing everything out. This film was returned from the Embassy of Finland or something like that. And it's actually a film, a 16mm film of what is it? I See, Ears Hear. And if that's any use to you guys, I'll send it up to you, right? Because I don't have any way of showing it. And I think one of the things that, who was the guy, Don? Who was Don somebody or other who was at Guelph years and years ago in the 80s?
Don Richardson.
Don Richardson.
Yeah.
And Don Richardson's work and what you continued with the Snowden. I don't know if everybody knows, but first the university axed, it reminds me of James Joyce. He said, Ireland is a sow that eats its own farrow, right? And Newfoundland has been the same, particularly Minoru University. And so they got rid of Extension. And I would argue it was when Extension went to work with the inshore fishermen, it had to go first before they closed the fishery. Bam, it went. So Tony saw that the Don Snowden Institute was next on the hit list. And so he basically carried it to Guelph, and Guelph took it, right? And so as far as I'm concerned, like I admire the work that Guelph's doing, and I don't really see anything comparable happening at MUN, right? And so this film, it's like on my bookshelf and, you know, still in that original, whatever, 1960s package, and you might find it useful, right?
Yeah. So there is another question from our audience, from Grace. She's more interested about the spoken word. So the question is, how are you intending to quantify and authenticate it from part of participatory concept. Grace from, I think, University of Reading.
Yeah. Again, I have to say IVA, right? This is just my own words coming out. And, it's interesting, like at one point, there was a program called Communities in Schools in Newfoundland. And it was funded by, what is it? The O'Connell, is it the funders in Montreal? The O'Connell Foundation or whatever it is, McConnell Foundation. Anyway, they're ready to fund it. So Ryakuga was asked to do the participatory evaluation. So I read a lot, particularly African participatory evaluations, and they were all basically in the health field. And one of the things that they did was they would write down the answers, to the questions they were asking, but they would also have somebody who wrote down the emotional response of the person and stuff like that. So we used small format video, and there's tons and tons of stuff on using small format video, like how you hide the camera, how you start it before, how you hide the red light, all this kind of stuff. And so that's what we did. So we went through all the stakeholders in the things, kids, parents, everybody, and we just did interviews. The interviews, of course, have not only do you get the emotional response from the face, but also you have the voice. They're the spoken word. And like Calvin, and I only go and speak to Calvin in person. I mean, I think I could do it digitally if, but he doesn't like to do stuff digitally. And so we meet face to face. And one of my problems with the university is they've kind of defunded my community traveling. Like they paid for my community traveling, my gas and stuff last year, but now, and they get cut 10% every year, right? The art people tell me they even have to buy their own art supplies now and stuff like that. And, but anyway, but I think it's really important. And so if I am going to participate in bringing my piece of the jigsaw puzzle to the rest of rural Newfoundland communities to try and rebuild the seventh wave, we're doing it by voice. We're doing it face to face. And, like we have to do digital. Digital can be amazing. We're all around the world. And even the radio programs we do are on the internet. Like, the voice is on the internet, so people all over can listen in and stuff, right? But we're human beings. I mean, that's something I feel really strongly. We're human beings, and we need to be face to face with our fellow human beings. When, for example, like the wonderful project that I did, it was a rural women's learning project in Thailand, and it was only for one summer, but I was working with the university women who are working with the rural women, and they were mat weavers, and they're getting ripped off by the middlemen. So I worked alongside the rural women as they made a video, which became a video letter, which was then sent to Bangkok to try and solve these problems. But the people who were my guides there, we went out to rural communities. I can remember, like, I'll never forget one rural community in the south of Thailand. We had to drive bumpity bump over this sandy road, and we were talking to the women of the community, which is who you always end up talking to. And this woman was telling me the story about how the logging trucks had been going there, and logging trucks are a problem in Newfoundland as well. The logging trucks had gone through and they'd killed a child. So what the women had decided to do is they had dug deep ditches in the sand. It was all sand, dug deep ditches. So the trucks to get through basically had to stop and crawl through. In Branch, which is one of the communities here, the trucks were rolling through. The women, again, the women in Branch, actually, a friend of mine, Mallory's here, who is a counselor in Branch since he was a teenager. In Branch, the trucks were rolling through the community. The women in Branch took out all kinds of furniture, and they piled it across the road. So the trucks they blocked the road. And the Mounties came, and who did the Mounties go after? Not the truck drivers, but the women. So, again and again, but I think we have to be doing this face to face. We have to insist, there were projects called Learning from the Global South with CUSO and that sort of thing in the late 80s. And I was taking youth to the Caribbean, to national youth camps, and we're learning a lot from they call them work study camps. I'd love to see work-study camps. When I was teaching in Dubai, the big fuss came out about the, I think it was a Danish cartoonist who was making these disrespectful cartoons about Muhammad and stuff like that. Anyway, this woman comes in from her office, they were working students, and she comes in, we've been discussing that. And, you know, we really have to get programs going where youth can go and exchange. Do you see what I mean? And so
yeah,
I'll finish. I could go on forever.
Great. Yeah, very, very interesting. I think we have a last question. Someone raised hand. I don't know whether you want to ask the question. You can go ahead. From Ottawa.
Yes, excuse me, from Ottawa. So I'm Denise Keko, and I'm a student from UQAM, University of Quebec at Montreal. And I'm very delighted being a part of this communication today. And thank you so much to Fred for sharing his amazing experience, though. And sorry. So in regard to my African origin too, the rural communication must be something very important, developed, but it still is the most challenging kind of communication there. And when I start studying this type of communication, I know it's very challenging, both like scientifically and on the terrain too, because of all, especially where I'm from, there are like a big themes of minings and all those kind of stuff. And when you go there, the way everything is changing, you really would like to help the population, like work with people and capacitating them, like empower them, but you even don't know where to start. You don't know how to gather people. You don't know how to organize. That's why I'm here today to see where Fred came from and how did he do to get there. I really would like to learn from his experience, and I'm happy to with Guelph University, who have like a share of that type of communication. We don't have it as far as I can remember. We don't have it in Ottawa. We don't have it in Montreal. I think Guelph is the first one, or I don't know. So being here today, being among you guys today, it for me a first step, learning step. And from this experience today, I really would like to keep in touch with you guys and see, like scientifically, which kind of literacy, which kind of book, which kind of writing you guys already have, and also on the terrain, how to start. As I said, I would like to really learn from Fred's experience mainly, and from you guys, your experience as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I'm mainly French, so I apologize for my strong French accent.
Oh, you are, you know, that's very rightly you said, like everything is clear, no problem with your language. We understood everything and we love it. And then thank you very much for, you know, appreciating University of Guelph. Yeah, I also immigrated in 2011, and when I'm here, I was in Canada. I recall, you know, I didn't find many universities in
Yeah.
Canada
Yeah.
is actually dealing with this kind of communication.
Mhm.
There are many communication studies program, but it's more about media, political communication, and those
Yeah.
kind of stuff. So I'm proud of, be able to join the program as a faculty. It's really fortunate for me. Fred, I think we are running out of time almost. Any like last minute?
Yeah, this is just one thing. When I was working in Thailand, it wasn't that for a long time, and they actually offered me a job there, and I often regret. I love the South heat, but anyway, I read a book, or I read in a magazine, and it was a quote from a Buddhist monk, and nobody else had heard of him, and I think I found out who he is. Anyway, it was the problems of this world are not going to be solved by capitalism or communism or Buddhism or Catholicism. The problems of this world will be solved by one person meeting another, and that person meets another, and that person meets another. And I think we're human beings. I think that's the basic.
Yeah, I totally agree. And of course, we don't ignore, or there is no way to ignore the power of digital medias and digital sphere. I think we also need to learn of, that, because in any way it will not stop. It will, grow on. And at the same time, we have to think of how we can meet each other and have more personal kind of interaction using digital media as well as face-to-face communication. And that's one of our work with Firoz, is developing critical digital literacy, right? We are trying to build something on it. So I think we are almost end to the program, like even extended time. And I see most of you actually stay tuned. I really appreciate your time. And there are many items to discuss, I'm sure. We can continue for another hour, but let's conclude the event for today. And I hope you have enjoyed this presentation and our discussion. We will also send the recording to you. And we used to organize our next part of the event webinar in winter 2022. I think you'll see an announcement, hopefully. So we will have more opportunities to engage in the discussion of this interesting topic. So please join me for a big applause to our speaker, Fred Campbell, and our discussant, and of course, all of our audience. And thank you for your contribution. So with that, I wish a wonderful weekend to all of you, and see you in our next event. Thank you very much.